The silence of a small town library is supposed to be a sanctuary and a place where the only thing that speaks is the rustle of turning pages and the soft hum of the air conditioning. But at 4:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, that silence felt heavy and like the air right before a massive storm breaks. I was sitting at a corner table, my heavy leather jacket draped over the back of the chair, and trying to make sense of some tax forms for the clubhouse when I saw her. She couldn't have been more than 17. She was sitting 3 tables away and buried in a mountain of textbooks, but she wasn't studying. She was hiding, and she had a thick wool scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, despite the fact that the heater was blasting, and she kept pulling her sleeves down over her knuckles until her hands were practically invisible. I've been the sergeant-at-arms for this chapter for a long time, and I've learned that people don't hide in plain sight unless they're terrified of being found. When she reached up to push a stray lock of hair behind her ear, and the scarf slipped for just a fraction of a second. That was all it took. In the harsh fluorescent light of the library, I saw them, deep and ugly purple bruises that looked like the imprint of a massive hand, blooming across the side of her throat like a dark, poisonous flower. And, Sears, if this girl's story is already making your blood boil and you want to stand with us, drop a comment saying "PROTSTT Girls" right now. And let's show the world that the Motor Mafia never looks the other way when a predator is in the shadows. Wars. I didn't want to scare her, and I'm a 6'4" man covered in ink and wearing a Hell's Angels cut. I know I'm not exactly the person a terrified teenager wants to talk to. I moved slowly, and picking up my coffee and walking toward the water fountain near her table. As I passed, I caught the scent of her, not perfume or the smell of old books, but the sharp and metallic tang of cold sweat and fear. I stopped a few feet away and spoke in a low, gravelly whisper that didn't carry past our small circle. "Those marks on your neck and kid, they didn't come from an accident, and they definitely didn't come from someone who cares about you." She froze. Her whole body became as rigid as a statue, and for a second, I thought she was going to bolt. She slowly looked up at me, her eyes wide and glassy with unshed tears, and her lower lip trembling so hard I thought it might split. She looked at the death's head patch on my shoulder, then back at my face, searching for something, and maybe a reason to trust a stranger when everyone she knew had failed her. I tripped, she stammered, her voice so thin it was almost transparent, but her eyes were screaming a different story. I knelt down beside her chair, putting myself on her level, making myself smaller. I told her my name was Jax, and I told her that in my world, we don't believe in accidents that leave finger-shaped bruises. I told her that whoever did this to her was a coward, and that cowards only thrive in the dark. She looked around the library, and her gaze darting toward the front entrance, as if she expected a monster to walk through the door at any moment. Then, she leaned in, her breath hitching in her chest, and whispered 4 words that made the room turn ice cold. "Hayes, my history teacher." The rage hit me like a physical blow to the solar plexus. And this wasn't just a street scrap or a domestic dispute. This was a predator using a position of authority to hunt in a place that was supposed to be safe. And she told me his name, Mr. Sterling, and she told me that the school administration had already investigated her claims a month ago. They'd called it a misunderstanding, and they'd told her to stop seeking attention. They'd protected the Teacher of the Year and left a 17-year-old girl to be a punching bag for his frustrations. And as I listened to her describe the threats he made, how he told her nobody ever believe a girl with behavioral issues over a respected educator, I felt a cold and hard resolve settle in my gut. This wasn't a job for the police, not yet. This was a job for the Brotherhood. I reached for my radio, and the heavy plastic feeling like a weapon in my hand. I hit the emergency channel and spoke into the mic with a voice that sounded like grinding stones. "This is Jax, and I have a code lilac at the city library. We have a predator in a classroom, and a girl who's been silenced by the system. I want every available brother to mount up, and I don't want a protest. I want an invasion. We meet at the campus gates at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. 78 bikes, not one less. Let's show Miss and Sterling what happens when the angels go to school." The ride back to the clubhouse wasn't the usual roar of adrenaline and wind. It was a heavy, somber procession. Maya, and that was her name, sat in the back of my old Chevy truck that I'd called in for her safety while I rode point on my Harley. I could see her in my rearview mirror, a tiny and broken figure framed by the massive glass windows of the truck, her hand still clutching the wool scarf, as if it were the only thing keeping her soul from leaking out. And when we pulled into the gravel lot of the Motor Mafia clubhouse, the atmosphere changed instantly. Usually, the pit is a place of loud music, and the clinking of beer bottles, and the rough laughter of men who have forgotten how to be soft. But as I walked Maya through those heavy steel doors, and the room went bone silent, 78 pairs of eyes, hardened by years of road grime and back alley scraps, landed on the girl. They didn't see a stranger, and they saw a daughter, a sister, a piece of the world that had been trampled by a monster. I walked her over to the center table, and the one where we usually plot runs or settle club business. Big Mac, our president, was sitting at the head, cleaning a part for his panhead, and he didn't say a word as I led Maya to the chair. I gently reached out and moved her scarf aside. The room didn't just go quiet, it went cold. In the dim and red, tinted light of the clubhouse, those purple bruises looked like a brand of shame, not for her, but for every man in that room who hadn't been there to stop it. And Big Mac stood up, his boots heavy on the floorboards, his shadow stretching across the room like a dark mountain. He looked at Maya, then at the marks on her throat, and then I saw his jaw clench so hard a vein began to throb in his temple. Before we revealed the plan for the morning, and the secret Mr. Sterling thought he'd buried forever, and smash that like button, hit subscribe, and comment a stand YTH Moe below. Your engagement is the fuel that helps us keep the wolves away from the innocent, and let's show the world that this family never walks alone. Jax. Big Mac's voice was a low, vibrating growl that seemed to come from the floor itself. And tell the brothers who did this. I didn't hold back. I told them about Mr. Sterling and the teacher of the year, the man who spent his Sundays at the local charity and his afternoons trapping a 17-year-old girl in the back of a classroom. And I told them about the school board's investigation, the way they'd brushed her off as a troublemaker to protect their own reputation. As the words left my mouth, and the sound of 78 men slowly standing up filled the room, a rhythmic, metallic scraping of chairs that sounded like a legion of soldiers preparing for battle. And there was no shouting, there was no chaos. This was a brotherhood that functioned on a different level of frequency. We weren't just a club, and we were a collective response to a world that had failed to protect its own. Doc, our club medic, stepped forward with a bag of supplies. And he didn't treat Maya like a patient, he treated her like a queen. While he cleaned the hidden cuts on her wrists and gave her a warm meal, and the rest of us gathered in the garage. The air was thick with the scent of motor oil and cold fury. Big Mac pulled out a map of the high school campus, and we aren't going there to break windows, he said, his voice flat and lethal. We're going there to break a system, mister. And Sterling thinks he's untouchable because he's got a title and a clean shirt. Tomorrow morning, and he's going to find out that his title doesn't mean a damn thing when 78 angels are standing at his classroom door. We arrive at 80 Hozard's AM sharp, and we don't stop for the gates. We don't stop for the security. We ride straight to the main quad. And Bisars, if your heart is racing right now, and you believe that no predator should ever hide behind a desk, and hit that like button and comment, K-Goanji, to hear the moment the 78 bikes hit the campus pavement. Your support is what gives us the strength to hold the line, AG. And the night was spent in a kind of focused, industrial silence. Usually, the before a big run involves a lot of talk, but not this time. The brothers were in the bays, and checking every bolt on their machines, polishing their chrome until it shone like a warning. We weren't just riding for Maya, and we were riding for every girl who had ever been told that her voice didn't matter. I stayed with Maya in the back office, and letting her sleep on the leather sofa under a stack of club blankets. Every hour, a different brother would stand guard at the door, silent and immovable, and we were a wall of steel around her, a fortress of leather and ink that the world couldn't penetrate. And as the first light of Wednesday morning began to bleed over the horizon, turning the Georgia sky a bruised shade of orange, and the sound of 78 engines firing up at once shook the very foundations of the clubhouse. It wasn't a noise, it was a declaration, and I helped Maya into the sidecar of my bike, wrapping her in a heavy wool blanket. She looked at me, her eyes finally showing a spark of something other than terror, and she saw the 78 bikes lined up in perfect, military-grade rows. She saw the death's head patches glowing in the dawn light, and she realized then that she wasn't going back to that school as a victim. She was going back as the leader of an army. I clicked my helmet into place, looked at Big Mac, and saw him tap his tank. It was time. We pulled out of the gravel lot, 78 Harleys in a tight, thunderous formation that stretched for 3 blocks. And the ground didn't just vibrate, it groaned under the weight of our purpose. The invasion was no longer a plan, it was a reality. And the suburban silence of Crestview High was about to be shattered by a frequency it had never been designed to handle. It was 7:55 a.m., and the air around the campus was filled with the mundane sounds of a Wednesday morning, the hiss of yellow bus brakes, the high-pitched chatter of teenagers, and the distant slamming of lockers. Parents were dropping their kids off in minivans, sipping lattes and worrying about algebra tests, and completely unaware that the moral fabric of their town was being held together by a thin, jagged line of lies. I led the pack, and my street glide cutting through the morning mist, with Maya tucked low in the sidecar. I could feel her shivering, not from the cold, but from the realization that we were entering the den of the man who had stolen her peace. But as she looked back and saw the 77 other Harleys behind us, and a solid, moving wall of chrome and black leather stretching as far as the eye could see, she didn't pull her scarf over her bruises. She sat up straight, and she was no longer a victim being dragged back to the site of her trauma. She was the spearhead of a revolution. We didn't slow down for the main gates, and the lone security guard, a man who had spent the last 20 years telling kids to tuck in their shirts, and took one look at the 78, Death's Head, patches approaching like a storm front, and dropped his clipboard. He didn't even reach for his radio, he just backed away, and his eyes wide as we roared past the Student of the Month banners and into the heart of the campus. We didn't stop at the visitors' lot, and we rode straight onto the main quad, the tires of our heavy machines churning up the manicured grass of the school's pride and joy lawn. The sound was biblical, and a synchronized, mechanical thunder that vibrated the windows of the science wing and sent a flock of crows screaming into the gray sky. Students froze in their tracks, and their phones held up to record a scene that looked like a movie. But the vibration in their chests told them this was very, very real, and that for serious, if your heart is racing right now and you can feel the thunder of those 70 engines in your soul, hit that like button and comment RIDFR Justice below. And we need to show every predator out there that the Motor Mafia is always watching. Let's make this viral for Maya Oz. We swarmed the quad in a tight, circular formation, and 89 bikes creating a perimeter around the main administration building. At exactly 8:02 am, Big Mac raised his hand, and then 78 engines cut out at the exact same moment. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise, and it was a vacuum of sound that sucked the air out of the morning. The only thing you'd hear was the tink, tink of cooling metal in the distant and frantic chirping of the school's alarm system. Kickstands hit the pavement with a rhythmic, metallic clack that sounded like a giant heart beating once, and we dismounted in unison, a wall of leather, denim, and raw muscle that turned the school's sunny quad into a fortress of retribution. Big Mac stepped forward, and his boots heavy on the concrete, his gaze fixed on the double doors of the main office. The principal, a man named Dr. Holloway, and the same man who had told Maya she was exaggerating for attention, burst through the doors, his face a sickly shade of gray, and he was followed by two frantic vice principals and a handful of teachers who looked like they were facing a firing squad. "What is the meaning of this?" Holloway stammered, and his voice cracking as he looked at the 78 bikers standing in a semicircle. "This is an educational facility. You are trespassing on government property, and I'm calling the police." Big Mac didn't even blink. He walked right up to Holloway, stopping just inches from his face, and forcing the man to look up at a reality he had spent months trying to ignore. "The police should have been here a month ago," Holloway, Max said, and his voice a low-frequency rumble that rattled the glass in the lobby doors. But you were too busy protecting your teacher of the year to notice that a girl was being systematically broken in your own hallways. We aren't here for you, and we're here for Mr. Sterling. And we aren't leaving until every student in this school sees what a predator looks like when he's stripped of his desk." And I walked Maya to the center of the quad, my hand on her shoulder. Students were leaning out of the second-story windows, their faces pale. Holloway looked at Maya, and then at the bruises on her neck that she was finally showing to the world, and he tried to look away. But the brothers wouldn't let him, and we formed a corridor of leather and ink, a path that led straight to the history wing where room 302 was located. "Maya," I whispered, "today, and you're the one who decides how this ends." The teacher of the year was currently inside, probably beginning his first period lecture on the rise of empires, and completely unaware that his own empire of fear was about to be burned to the ground. And I, Sarah, if you believe that authority figures should be held accountable, and that no child should ever be silenced by a principal's office, and smash that like button and comment cape go ing to hear the moment we kicked in the door of room 302. Your support is what gives the innocent a voice, and the faculty tried to form a line, a pathetic human barrier of cardigans and clipboards, but as 78 of us began to move as one, a slow and synchronized march of heavy boots, the line shattered like glass. We weren't shouting. We weren't brandishing weapons. We were simply an unstoppable force of nature. And we entered the hallway of the history wing, the sound of our boots on the linoleum floors sounding like a drum roll of doom, and the smell of floor wax and old sandwiches was replaced by the sharp, industrial scent of motor oil and cold rage. We reached room 3U2, and the wooden door had a small glass window, and through it, I could see Mr. Sterling. He was standing at a whiteboard, a marker in his hand, and looking like the perfect image of a mentor. He hadn't heard us yet with the hum of the classroom projector. I looked at Big Mac, then at Maya, and the girl's hand was shaking, but her jaw was set. I didn't knock. I didn't wait for permission, and I put my boot against the frame and kicked the door of room 302 off its hinges. The crash echoed through the entire school, a final and absolute declaration that the secret was out. The invasion was over. Now the reckoning was beginning. The door didn't just open, and it splintered under the weight of 1,000 pounds of righteous fury, the sound echoing through the sterile hallways of the history wing, like a thunderclap in a library. And inside room 302, the air was thick with the mundane scent of dry erase markers and teenagers' perfume, until we stepped in. Mr. Sterling was standing at the whiteboard, and, his hand frozen mid-sentence, the marker poised like a weapon he no longer knew how to use. He looked exactly like the man the community adored, crisp blue button down and pressed khakis, and a smile that had probably been practiced in front of a mirror for years. But as 78 Hell's Angels began to filter into that small classroom, and filling every inch of the perimeter, that practiced smile didn't just fade, it curdled. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly and grayish pallor that matched the linoleum floors. The students, Maya's peers, sat in a stunned, paralyzed silence, and their eyes darting from the death's head patches on our backs to the man they'd been told to respect. And the savage, if your heart is racing right now and you want to see the mask finally fall off this predator, hit that like button and comment on no more C-SRATs below. And your support is the shield that protects girls like Maya from the monsters in suits. Big Mac didn't say a word at first. He just walked to the front of the room, and his boots heavy and deliberate, and stood directly in front of Sterling's desk. The contrast was biblical, the polished, academic coward versus the raw and iron-clad reality of the Brotherhood. Sterling tried to find his voice, his throat bobbing as he swallowed a lump of pure terror. You can't be in here?" he managed to stammer, his eyes flickering toward the classroom phone. "This is a violation of state law. I am a tenured professional, and I demand you leave immediately." Big Mac leaned over the desk, his massive hands gripping the edges of the wood until the veneer began to crack. "And tenure doesn't protect you from us, Sterling," Mac said, his voice a low, vibrating growl that made the pens on the desk rattle. And professionalism doesn't involve leaving finger-shaped bruises on a 17-year-old girl's neck. We aren't here for a lecture, and we're here to show these kids exactly what you are." I led Maya into the center of the room. She was trembling, and her hand gripping my leather sleeve so hard her knuckles were white, but she didn't look at the floor, and she looked straight at the man who had turned her life into a waking nightmare. Sterling's eyes landed on her, and for a split second, that old predatory spark flickered, and a silent threat, a look that said, "You'll pay for this." But then he looked past her at the 77 other bikers blocking every exit, their arms crossed, and their faces like stone, and that spark was snuffed out by the cold realization of his own powerlessness. I reached out and gently moved Maya's scarf aside, and exposing the deep, purple bruises to the entire class. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Some of the girls started to cry, some of the boys stood up, and their faces flushing with a mix of shame and anger. They had seen Maya struggling for weeks, and they had believed the school's lies. Now, and the truth was written in black and blue on her skin. If this is hitting you hard and you're proud of Maya for standing her ground, and smash that like button and comment I Bell Ivy Sar. Let's make sure this message reaches every student who is suffering in silence through sex. And the pattern interrupt happened then. It wasn't just Maya. As the silence in the room became unbearable, a girl in the back row, a quiet student named Chloe, and slowly stood up. Her voice was shaking, but it carried through the room like a bell. "He did it to me too," she whispered. Then another girl stood. "And me. And he told me I'd lose my scholarship if I told anyone." The room felt like it was tilting on its axis. The teacher of the year. wasn't just a predator, and he was a serial hunter who had used the school's reputation as his personal blind. Sterling's legs finally gave out, and he slumped into his expensive leather chair, and, his breathing coming in shallow, frantic gasps, he looked like a cornered rat, stripped of his title, his authority, and his dignity. Maya stepped forward, and moving out from behind my shadow, she stood just 3 feet away from the man she had feared more than death itself. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. Her voice was steady and infused with a power that had been forged in the fire of the last 24 hours. "You told me nobody would ever believe me," she said, and, her words cutting through the air like a blade. "You told me you were the Empire and I was just dust. But look around this room, Mr. Sterling. The Empire is gone, and the dust just turned into a mountain of steel. You will never touch another girl in this town. You will never speak another lie from a podium. Today, and the secret is dead." She reached onto his desk, picked up his Teacher of the Year plaque, and dropped it onto the floor, and it shattered into a dozen pieces of cheap plastic and fake gold. The campus security and the local police finally arrived, their sirens wailing in the distance, but they didn't burst in with guns drawn. They walked in to find 78 Hell's Angels standing in a silent and respectful circle while 3 more girls came forward to tell their stories to the officers. The system hadn't protected Maya, but the Brotherhood had forced the system's hand. We didn't have to lay a finger on Sterling. The weight of the truth, and the presence of 78 men who were ready to ensure that truth was heard, was enough to break him. As the officers led Sterling out in handcuffs and through a gauntlet of his own students who were now shouting for justice, I looked at Big Mac. The job wasn't done, but the fortress had been breached. Now, and we had to make sure the ruins stayed down. The walk of shame from room 3 to the back of the patrol car was a long and silent gauntlet that stripped the last of the illusions from Crestview High. As Mr. Sterling was led out in handcuffs, and his head bowed and his expensive leather shoes scuffing against the linoleum, and he had to pass 78 men who looked like the very nightmares he used to tell Maya she was imagining. We didn't shout. We didn't throw punches, and the silence of 78 Hell's Angels is 1,000 times more terrifying than their roar. It's a silence that says, "And we are the witness to your ending." As the cruiser pulled away, the tires crunching on the same gravel we had occupied, a heavy and tectonic shift occurred in the atmosphere of that school. The Teacher of the Year was gone, but the men who had protected him were still sitting in their comfortable offices, and the Brotherhood wasn't about to let them finish their lats in peace. And War sees if this story moved you and you believe that every girl deserves a protector like the Motor Mafia, hit subscribe, smash that like button, and share this video so more people can see these heroes in action. Which part of Maya's journey hit you the hardest, and the bruises in the library, or the moment the classroom door shattered? Comment below and let's talk about it together. Etc. And the days following the invasion were a whirlwind of legal battles and systemic collapses, and the school board tried to hold an emergency meeting behind closed doors to manage the PR crisis. But they forgot one thing, and we don't need an invitation to a public hearing. When those doors opened, they found the front 3 rows occupied by 78 men in leather cuts, and Big Mac didn't say much. He just sat there, a silent reminder that the eyes of the Brotherhood were now fixed on their ledger books. Under that kind of pressure, and the truth didn't just leak out, it flooded. It was discovered that 3 separate reports about Sterling had been misplaced by Dr. Holloway over the last 2 years, and, by the end of the week, the principal and 2 board members had resigned. The system that had tried to silence Maya was being dismantled and rebuilt, brick by brick, and by the very people it had tried to ignore. Maya didn't go back to being the girl in the wool scarf, and the transformation was like watching a wilted flower suddenly find a desert spring. She stayed at the clubhouse for a few weeks while the dust settled, and the brothers treated her like a queen. Doc helped her find the best legal counsel in the state, and Tiny spent his afternoons teaching her how to ride a small 250cc Scout bike in the back lot. She wasn't a victim anymore, she was an associate in spirit, and she learned that power wasn't something people gave you. It was something you claimed for yourself when you realized you had a family that would never let you fall. And I remember the day she finally took that wool scarf off for good. We were standing in the clubhouse bay, the sun streaming through the rafters, and she looked at her reflection in the chrome of my street glide. The bruises were fading into faint, yellowed memories, but the light in her eyes was like a newborn star. And this story is the ultimate example of redemption through action. People see the death's head, and they think of chaos, but Maya saw it as a shield, and we established a safe passage program for the school where a rotation of brothers would be at the gates every morning and afternoon. We didn't do it to be the police, and we did it to be the presence. We wanted every girl in that school to know that if they ever felt a hand on their shoulder that didn't belong there, and they didn't have to go to a principal who wouldn't listen. They just had to walk to the curb and talk to a man in a vest. And the community impact was a total reclaim of the town's spirit. The fear that Sterling had cultivated for years was replaced by a sense of collective vigilance, and Maya graduated 6 months later. She didn't walk across that stage alone. When her name was called, 78 engines revved in the parking lot, a thunderous and mechanical standing ovation that drowned out the principal's speech. She walked with her head held high, and her diploma in one hand and her little sister, patch tucked into her gown. She's in college now, studying to be a criminal prosecutor. And she told me once that she wants to spend her life being the voice for the girls who are still hiding in libraries, too afraid to speak. And she knows that the road ahead is long, but she also knows that she has 78 angels at her back, and that makes her the most dangerous person in any courtroom. And as the sun sets over the clubhouse tonight, casting long, purple shadows across the gravel, I look at the 78 we've painted on the wall of the bay, and it's a reminder that we are more than just a club. We are a response to a world that has forgotten how to be brave. We are the watchers on the highway, and the guardians of the silent, and the living nightmare of those who prey on the innocent. Mr. Sterling is sitting in a state cell tonight, and Dr. Holloway is a memory. But Maya is a fire. And as long as there's gas in our tanks and air in our lungs, we will keep that fire burning. And if you're out there tonight, and you're wearing a scarf to hide a secret, just listen for the hum in the ground. Listen for the vibration in the air. We're coming. And we won't stop until the halls are safe again. As if this story moved you, hit subscribe, smash that like button, and share it so more people can see these heroes in action. Which part of Maya's journey hit you the hardest, the discovery at the library or the final ride off? And comment below and let's talk about it. Would you like me to start the next story about a veteran in trouble or a girl who sent a hidden message to the clubhouse? And your engagement keeps our engines running and the roads safe for everyone. We ride for you!